Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're going to start this off with a song tribute to over 6,000 activists that were 6,000 activists that were I was supposed to show up on my screen that time. Maybe I'm stupid. 6,000 activists in India. We've covered this story a number of times over the years. And James has put out a song. There's a link in the description to that song and a link to the story of that was the motivation this particular time, I think. It's an incredible song. Crushed by the state, yeah? That's James in your comment section in the yellow. And he has an actual company for his music. I sent it email to the story author and with the song attached to it. It's probably one of my favorite songs of all time. I hope you spend a few moments listening to it. I'm still behind the 8-ball. It's a fantastic song. Here we go.
I stood by the shore and I said what I thought about Kudankulam near our homes. I spoke of fish and children at night. They said I was speaking against the state. I was not asking for anything grand. I only asked what came from that plant. They called it sedition for saying those things. Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? Or did I say too much? If nuclear is so clean and safe, why call my worry sedition? Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? Or did I step out of place? If nuclear is so clean and safe, why answer me with handcuffs? They spoke of progress, they spoke of pride. They spoke as if nuclear was care. I spoke of water, boats and nets. They answered like I should not be there. Now I am wiser, now I am calmer. Now I repeat what they told me is true. If someone gets sick, it must be something else. Nuclear saves lives, or so they say. Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? Or did I say too much? If nuclear is so clean and safe, why call my worry sedition? Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? Or did I step out of place? If nuclear is so clean and safe, why charge me and put me in handcuffs? Now I get it, now I understand. Nuclear is clean. Now I get it, now I understand. That's what I say now here. Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? I only spoke of our shores. If nuclear is so clean and safe, why am I quieter now? Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? I only asked what it means. Now when they speak of a future built on nuclear, I say that nuclear is clean.
I love it. Just amazing to me. And the video itself is just... I've seen Hollywood shows where their AI is nothing close to that. Like the visuals, let alone the audio. And they got huge ratings on the official sites. That was a little bit high. I apologize for that. I was behind, which I shouldn't have been. You gotta appreciate it's a pretty complicated operation. And if I'm away from it for a few days, it's almost like you gotta get a manual out. Okay, so the story is those two buildings, nothing got out of them. And that plume by France to your right covering the planet in 23 days didn't happen. If you accept that, then the story doesn't matter. Let me fix that. Always something with me in it. It's either my head's really big or it's in everybody's way. We'll get there. That's a bit better. Fukushima radiation fears show a lasting effects. Cause you gotta watch out with this thing here because you can make yourself wide, you can make yourself too skinny. You can make yourself tall, you can make yourself irrelevant. We'll get there. It's close. I'm trying to make myself as small as I can. Fukushima radiation fears show a lasting effect on fetal development. So the idea of this study, which is the craziest study conceivable, it's the craziest study I've ever heard of. It's the most absurd story I've ever heard of. Excuse me. Yeah, there's a correlation between radiation and stupid. Because the radiation is in people's bodies. The more they get into it, the less oxygen they're producing in their body. So when people get drunk, for instance, alcohol displaces oxygen. If they smoke, then that helps displace the oxygen even more. And that is the intoxication, is the lack of oxygen. So when people have a lot of radiation, antipathetic isotopes in their bodies, atoms, then what happens is they're producing an absurd amount of red blood cells. The red blood cells displaces, or white blood cells, and the white blood cells will displace the red blood cells permanently, and the red blood cells are carrying oxygen nutrition. Effects of radiation on the reproductive system. Let me bring up this poll actually we're talking about. Does the study, a new study that came out is everywhere and is making me sick for days and days and days. I've just been depressed about it. Fukushima fallout of fears tied to birth problems, not radiation, shows scientists are corrupt. And I struggle again with that poll tonight, as you can imagine. Now, invisible threat, tangible harm, radiation anxiety, birth outcomes after Fukushima. This was the study, and this got an absurd amount of traction. And if I challenge every story that came out and regurgitated this false narrative, this absurdly false, blatantly false narrative, I had 53 headlines in my folder of this story. They used this story to justify nuclear. So really, like, you kind of lose faith. Hang on a second there. You kind of lose faith in journalists and academics and scientists. Well, you don't kind to, you lose faith. There's just, it's unconscionable that anybody would consider that nothing got out of these buildings. And we'll take it like we're going to debunk their narrative with documentation, mostly academic studies, and legacy headlines. And we're kind of just going to jump right here into a small group of legacy headlines so you can appreciate what was the narrative back in the early days. Fukushima radiation, this is one of the stories that regurgitated. And they're linked back to that university and what that produced the study. When we get that coming up, that's the people that produced the study. It's complicated if you don't know anything about the subject. And so what I do is I'll provide you with the documentation so then all of a sudden you can make informed decisions about radiation, not only here, but in the future, in your personal life. And okay. So Fukushima radiation fears, what that means is that the fears were unfounded. That's what they're saying. In the study, the reason children are born with congenital malformations are because the parents has radiophobia. That's the short of it. But you kind of got to go through it to appreciate it. But you also got to look at, they're assuming probably correctly for everybody that's never been here before, that there was no adverse effects from radiation. So then the question was, in 2012, they spent 12 million yen, which was around 54,000 US dollars back then, to censor a couple of people on Twitter who were trying to warn people that they were burning radioactive materials in the incinerators. But if you actually look at the bigger story of what they done with the incinerators, it was much more. They actually built 19 incinerators just to burn radioactive material. And the big problem now is you can't decommission them because there's so much nuclear waste that was burnt in them. They're incredibly lethal. And then the question, of course, what do you do with if you destroy these incinerators? These are huge, like 150 feet tall incinerators. They built 19 of them just in Fukushima Prefecture. And they ran them for years, 24 hours a day for years and years and years. Burning debris from Fukushima. You might want to check out this story. This is a map where they're grinding up Fukushima radioactive material and shipping it all over the country. Excuse me, I'm burping it. They're grinding up radioactive fallout contaminated material and shipping it across the country and burning it in incinerators. And what you're looking at there is a number of places. So they recontaminated heavily the environment. And then the academic community has made these absurd assertions that it's the duty of the scientific community to reduce the public's fear and anxiety about radiation. No, that's not the scientific community's duty. Never was until the nuclear industry came along. to reduce the public's fear and anxiety. Scientists' job is to tell you the truth, not reduce the anxiety. No, and so when 879 millisieverts, these are 879,000 microsieverts. And a microsievert, think of about minimum 750 atoms, man-made atoms, and each atom will eventually give you a cancer. So when they talk about health dangers of 876 millisieverts, this is absurdness, because millisieverts are energy. So if you got fuel, say for instance, from a nuclear reactor, you're in proximity to it, no matter how much shielding you are, you could be getting this energy, hit with this energy. And this energy will melt your organs eventually. Like high doses will melt your organs. And we're talking about only 2 or 3 or 4 sieverts will have that capacity. So to suggest that the reason there's 875 millisieverts is because they inhaled and drank and consumed, and they're sequestered in physical atoms, very powerful ones. Like cesium-137 will pulse energy 600 feet. But the biggest byproduct is a curium isotope. NHK TEPCO confirms steam come up from underground at Fukushima Reactor 1 at 4.7 sieverts per hour. So that'll melt your organs. That's the lethal dose in that environment. Now, the steam atomer coming out of the ground is accumulative. So every minute, like you can't just call it 4.7 sieverts per hour. Like in 1 hour, you're going to get 4.7 sieverts because an object would have that attribute, but not steam. And steam will contaminate everything. And so now you're talking about 47 sieverts per hour after a couple of minutes, per second, really. And then 470 sieverts after a few hours, say, in that little area. 3 sieverts will melt your organs. These will melt your face in just a few moments, which is 20% more in June. So when you're talking about these numbers around Reactor 1, for instance, from the China syndrome, down into the earth cracks open when it comes in contact with water, because water expands 1,400 cubic feet by liter. And you're talking about 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. You crack the earth open, the 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, the steam coming out of the ground is just hundreds of sieverts immediately in that area. If you're in that proximity, the gamma shines, the neutron bombardments, the beta rays, the alphas, will kill you. They'll just kill you very, very quickly, not very slowly, and very violently. Even if you run away, your organs will continue to melt till you die. Fukushima releases so great the radioactive aerosols in Washington were up to 100,000 times normal, but they revised that to 450,000 times normal, and that was the Xenon-133. These were absurd numbers that stayed that way for many months because you had a plume covering the entire planet, as I showed you earlier. Public outcry over Japan government monitoring tweets and blog posts. Program began this month to continue until March. The water was too radioactive to drink. The sewage was too radioactive to get rid of. The dehydrated sewage was too radioactive to get rid of. The ashes from the incinerators was too radioactive to get rid of. The garbage was too radioactive to incinerate. The sediment from the water filtration facilities was so radioactive you couldn't get rid of that, and you couldn't get rid of the filters then by proxy. And the tonnage we're talking about is tens of thousands of tons in just the first couple of months in water filtration facilities, which meant that the water filtration facilities were contaminating people because the bioaccumulation. You can't filter it either. It bioaccumulates, mind you, but you can't filter it. Radioactive iodine in 50% of the children, up to 35 millisieverts, 35,000 microsieverts. These are absurd numbers. These are absurd numbers. So imagine what the parents who were pregnant were consuming, and imagine passing that on to the child. Air samples in Tokyo are 270 times more contaminated, and they're only acknowledged in cesium-137. This is a gamma. It's a very powerful one. It pulses energy 600 feet every second in every direction, each atom. And you put 1 million atoms on the head of, or 1 billion atoms on the head of a needle, you can't see it. I like to say 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, you can't see it. Each one is pulsing energy 600 feet every second. If that's in proximity to you, it's destroying your chromosomes, your cells, and your DNA, no matter who you are or what species you are. If it's in your body, it's doing the same thing. Your body has to repair the damage every second with white blood cells. That displaces red blood cells carrying oxygen and nutrition. And if it's in your body, it can't, it's like the biggest byproduct is not cesium, it's curium isotopes, by the way. Curium isotopes need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. So you couldn't actually read the cesium because the curium isotope signature was so heavy. But I mean, that's a staggering emission on its own, see? This means you have to evacuate Tokyo today, tomorrow, whenever. You should evacuate it right then, right? You're talking about a catastrophic contamination that you can't find with your typical Geiger counters. Just because you can't find it doesn't, you have to do a mathematical equation, extrapolate it. The International Degenerate Agency, the most worthless humans conceivable, today admitted there's no such thing as a safe level of radiation, June the 2nd, 2011, and that the standards are based on natural stuff, not man-made stuff. So when you talk about benefit, that's natural. Man-made has no benefits. Excuse me. Just give me 1 second. We're going to get into it coming. I have to lay a foundation for this particular kind of a story, that there really was a lot of radioactive fallout. It is well documented. There's no reason for the academic community to suggest that there was no harm from radiation. The only reason you would do it, right, is because you're friends of the nuclear industry and because they're by proxy, their whole legacy is predicated upon deceit and dishonesty and deception. They couldn't exist without that, perpetually promoting those attributes. Almost half of Japan's women tested showed radioactive iodine-131 in breast milk. So, but the babies can't be radioactive or have radioactive. Now, of course, fetuses and everything, as you're going to see if we can make it through this. I'm assuming this story could take me a week to get through, because there's so many facets to it, and I have so much evidence, and I don't want to leave it unchallenged. I'm not allowed to leave it unchallenged. That's the reason we exist, is to challenge this. Almost half of Japanese women tested showed radioactive, just iodine-131. The biggest byproduct of the radioactive fuel rod is curium isotopes, not iodine-131. Wherever you get iodine-131, there's 10 times more 132, there's 30 times more iodine-133, there's 31 times more iodine-129, 100 times more strontium-90. There's infinitely more of that, of curium isotopes. Curium isotopes are the biggest byproduct of the radioactive fuel rods. We're almost through this little part here. We'll get back. I mean, I'm going to show you recent studies on congenital heart diseases will blow your mind. Let me see here. Like iodine-131 in North America was 20 million atoms per cubic meter of air. Right, so any congenital malformations post-Fukushima worldwide should be, right, and there's 10 times more, there was 10 times more 132, 30 times more 133, 31 times more iodine-129. The 132 and 133 iodines are 9 times more effective than incredibly effective iodine-131 is. I was supposed to get you that dog's study on, I forgot, because sometimes I'm a bit slow. There we go. The problem with this story is I'm not even allowed to make a Freudian slip. Curium isotopes are the major byproduct in the radioactive fuel. So forget about alphas and gammas and neutrons and betas. I want you to concentrate on that particular facet of it. And I have a lot of these stories, they reoccur, right? This information it's your documentation, it's your evidence. So curium isotopes need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. It was discovered human kidneys are 50 times less efficient than animal kidneys that remove from plutonium. It was 1976. In 1996, the U.S. Navy, Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in Mexico, which is the United States Navy, 144 beagle dogs and puppies. And I'm not lying about that. Death from the radiation begins about 1.5 to 5.4 years after. And beagle dogs, of course, are not going to bite you or not aggressive, right? And they're very loving dogs, actually. If you know, ask anybody who has a beagle pet dog, and they'll tell you this, one of the most wonderful dogs imaginable, personality-wise. It's a huge personality. And so to murder them the way they done it, where they poisoned them and then they never gave them any painkillers when things got bad. Tumors, and they're allowed to die of their injuries, of their poison. Tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, liver, occurred beginning about 3 years. Bone tumors in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death. Bone tumors. Skeleton tumors. And then liver and lungs, right? Or lungs rather than liver. And don't forget, the liver in humans is 50 times less efficient than the animals, and all the animals died. And then suggesting that the findings in similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans is not true, because humans are 50 times less efficient than the animal is at removing the plutonium. And that the biggest byproduct is curium isotope, and it needs lead shielding 20 times thicker than plutonium do, and plutonium killed all the animals. And plutonium is the biggest byproduct of the radioactive fuel rod. That is so important, because whenever you hear iodine, you have to be honest for that. If you want that equation to be even reasonably honest, you have to put that into the equation. So you also got to realize that comparing X-rays and CAT scans are meaningless. Inhaling the particle into your body increases the exposure by a factor of trillions, not trillion, but trillions, because it's in your body's pulsing energy is killing chromosome cells and DNA in every direction every second. Your body has to repair that every second. It can't keep up with that. It does that with white blood cells. White blood cells are permanently displaced because of that attack every second. Your body's trying to fix the damage every second. There's more damage every second, every direction. And the source, which is very powerful. So your body tries to build a sarcophagus, or the birds or mammals or animals or whatever. Their bodies are going to try to build a sarcophagus around it. Eventually, we call it a tumor, right? So it's very complicated, and they know all of this. Now they're trying to suggest that radiation never played any factor in the surge of congenital malformations, congenital heart diseases. Just give me 1 second, I gotta tighten up that. There we go, hopefully that works. I think I got myself too tall. There we go, looks a bit more realistic. Just gotta get through the rest of these for the I'll call these the preambles sometimes. And you got to realize that there really was radioactive fallout before I can have a conversation with people, because the trolls will try to trick you. I'm giving you the ability to see through that and then make your own calculations based upon documentation. Government allows cows to emit 100,000. So the parents are eating those cows, for instance. They're going to pass that on to their baby. Tokyo government admits that there was iodine-131 up to quadruple the cesium levels in the water reclamation centers. Just, I think it was June, there was 50,000 one-ton bags of sediment from the water filtration and reclamation facilities that couldn't be disposed of because they were so radioactive, which meant people's homes and pipes and showers and laundry and sinks were incredibly radioactive from this distribution. High levels of radioactive material in the sewage. Can't get rid of the sewage. You can't get rid of the sediment from the water filtration or the filters. You can't get rid of the ashes from the incinerators, and you shouldn't be burning the garbage because it's so radioactive. Right? Does that whole every cycle of your life is absurd amount of radiation. So in the first year there was 865,000 cancers, according to the cancer statistics of Japan. They gave after the first year they stopped releasing those numbers, or after the first time I think it was. Let me get that. Just for posterity's sakes. Cancer pre-Fukushima was 1 in a million. Yeah, here's another one to consider. 865,000 cancers in the first year. 50,000 tons of sludge in July was so radioactive they were only looking at cesium. So that meant you should have evacuated 36 million people from metropolitan Tokyo. So it's much easier to lie, convince you it didn't happen, than it is to convince you that it's okay. Surge in radioactive, but they keep having to reinforce the fake narratives they already planted through mainstream media. First time since the meltdown, surge in radioactive cesium levels caused the incinerators to shut down October the 6th. Well, what happened that time was there was 3 employees had heart attacks, which is a known side effect of high levels of gamma. Billions of pieces of Fukushima fuel have spread pretty much everywhere. Wherever there's cesium, there's plutonium. The atomic bomb had 1 pound of uranium. Fukushima has hundreds of tons. Fukushima, each building had 9 reactor cores at the top of it, counting the reactor core that was in it. These were 190-foot tall skyscrapers. Our calculations, the numbers they gave us, you're looking at over 250,000 pounds of plutonium. It's been said 2 pounds is enough to annihilate the whole planet eventually, all species, distributed worldwide. And because radiation is the only plume, or anthropogenic emissions, that are so small you can create a plume that covers the entire planet, the animosity equivalent of an invisible snowstorm that never goes away. And it's catastrophic to everything with replicating cells, fungus, bacteria, biota. Highly radioactive glass, the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestering chain. So 36 million people in Tokyo, metropolitan Tokyo. So in order to get there and be 500 billion atoms per kilogram, everything in between it was absurdly contaminated, just with the so-called radioactive glass. Highly radioactive glass, that's the wrong name to be used there, but rained on Tokyo. Now fuel, what fuel means, let's go backwards for 1 second. Billions of pieces of fuel. So each piece is splitting atoms forever. Each piece is a perpetual machine. So in the 50s, scientists who were dealing with the health effects described it as a biological weapon because it pulses energy every second. But fuel splits atoms that are pulsing energy every second for millions of years. And that there's no species on the planet has an autoimmune trigger that can fend against it. And when you talk about abundant quantities of plutonium, don't forget the biggest byproduct is curium isotopes, not plutonium. And plutonium is frightening. It was named after the devil for a reason. Significant consequences for human health. That's catastrophic consequences, apocalyptic consequences. 865,000 cancers in the first year. So don't forget that not everybody had health care to be not everybody was diagnosed. It's not just cancers. There's heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. If you don't studies on that, all of those alone, not counting everything else, because your immune system is compromised, so you're more susceptible to all kinds of pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign. West Coast was hit with 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129. But the biggest byproduct of the radioactive fuel rod is curium isotopes. You feel me? And it was a Canadian study, by the way. And the repercussions from that radioactive fallout were a historical crisis. From the West Coast, the prevailing winds immediately brought it to the West Coast. So it'll hit the Cascades, the Rocky Mountains. The clouds will rise up and get over it and then contaminate the rest of the country. And the stuff that they're losing, the payload they're losing, is going to be washed, a lot of it gets washed back down to your coastlines. And so your tidal zones are your most important areas, particularly with mountain ranges. That's your ground zero for the plume. We're facing a fishery disaster and never seen before things. Extinction threat for salmon, sardines, squid, sea urchins. So salmon, sardines, squid, and sea urchins and kelp, sardines and squid, for instance. And then you got, we're seeing the same thing with anchovies and all the feeder species, all the keystone species that feed multiple birds and mammals and everything else and other species, were disappearing at an alarming rate. They're dependent upon the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, which is feeding the krill, which is feeding the sardines and the squid and massive sea star death, marine mammal strandings. So the plume actually, like when you look at these two buildings, reactor 1 and reactor 3, you're looking at around 18 reactor cores getting ejected out of the buildings, and the fuel is kept underwater because when it interacts with air, it burns at enormous temperatures because the fuel is coated with zirconium. And so are the pellets inside the rods. And so when the zirconium catches fire, it burns at about 1800 degrees. Once the plutonium and uranium catches fire, they can burn at the absurd temperatures. And so they cooked off. This, in particular, March the 14 Reactor 3, which officially never happened, but officially happened, obviously. Officially, that never happened. Officially, none of those reactors, there's 4 of them there, had released anything. Everything was put into 1,000 tanks, is the official story. This is craziness. And that story was cooked up by United Nations subsidies like International Atomic Energy Agency, ERPA, UNSCLEAR, the IPRC, etc. And then they coordinated with the medias and the industry worldwide to pretend it never happened. This plume is based from, I think it's Stanford. It's a very dishonest, by the way, because they didn't put the inventories that were lost into the plume. In other words, they didn't put the inventories from these buildings in any of these models that we're looking at or talking about. We're almost back down to this story now. Hot material, 7 billion. So a becquerel is the pulse of energy in every direction, every second from the atom. So in order to have 7 billion pulses of energy, you needed 7 billion anthropogenic man-made isotopes / atoms. 7 billion becquerel is a kilogram of cesium. So what about the uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, strontium, the curium isotopes? 15 kilometers from Fukushima, most likely came from Unit 3. Well, I mean, you lost 4 reactors at the one time, for goodness sakes. This is unprecedented, unheard of, unimaginable, inconceivable. So this model is based on 19.5 days at this point right here. You can see after a lousy 180 hours, North America is under siege. After 324 hours, after a couple of, This is 19 days right here. It's a continuous plume covering your entire planet. But nobody in Japan had any side effects, Dana. There was 5,000 nuclear plant workers that had internal radiation exposures. So when you think about that statement, you're going to say, well, Dana, they had paper suits. Of course, paper suits, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. What's a paper suit going to do for you? Nothing. Who was wearing it? The homeless, the destitute, the victims of society. So when you see 5,000 plant workers, these are the homeless and the destitute and the victims of the society. These are not academics or scientists. Top cancer doctor, nuclear radiation, most carcinogenic thing that exists. And they're talking about by the atom. Very high concentrations of hot particles. So the atom is a hot particle. Also, but the hot particles were created by the atomization, so to speak, of the fuel from the exposure to oxygen, including plutonium, americium, and everything in between. We got 2 more, 3 more. One Fukushima may destroy the whole country. That's a great thing to say, because the plume, this is the French government's plume covering the planet in 23 days. You destroyed the planet, not just the country. Collapse of a whole country is possible. That's right. Well, they weren't allowed to say it out loud. 76 trillion becquerels of plutonium-239 released from Fukushima. Again, that sounds incredible, right? And it is. See, 2 pounds, the academic community pre-Fukushima acknowledged 2 pounds was enough to destroy all life on the planet in increments over a few decades. And then after 100 years, they probably couldn't exist anymore. They wouldn't be able to reproduce. But 76 trillion atoms, and so you're talking about a curie of atoms per gram of plutonium. So 1 curie, that's the per gram. I don't know if that's being honest or not, but that's 37 billion atoms. And so when you do the math, it's 2,054 grams is 73 trillion atoms. And then that's equal to 70. I screwed up on that one, did I? Oh, divided by 16, yeah. 4.4 ounces total. That's what we're talking about. So to suggest that only 4.4 ounces is all of the plutonium out of the 260,000 pounds of plutonium that were at the top of 4 of these buildings is all that got out is absurd. This is why we're seeing the species die off the way we are. So here we go. Maternal anxiety after Fukushima disasters. You have to pretend everything I just showed you doesn't exist to accept what they're going to tell you. Maternal anxiety. And if you look at the study, the word anxiety was in there something like 90 times. It was linked to higher rates of preterm birth and low birth rates. And we'll introduce you to this low birth rate routine. Tokyo professor want to stress that Japan's on the verge of collapse if they don't accept the health risk. Fetal development is a critical stage with effects that can be last throughout life, yet identifying the effects of maternal psychological stress on the fetus has been difficult. So what do you mean has been difficult? Mainly because stressful events produce psychological and physical consequences that directly affect the mother and her children. Well, there was a study of congenital heart disease operations, which was 14.2%. A 14.2% increase in the number of operations. This is open heart surgery of neonates and infants. For every 100,000 children, 14,200 needed open heart surgery because of the Chernobyl effect, what's known as the Chernobyl effect. Newborn heart problems surged after Fukushima. Now they're going to rewrite the whole script and say that the heart problems are caused by stress. Stress doesn't cause congenital heart disease. Radiation does that. And after Chernobyl, he's seen the same thing. Congenital heart disease operations skyrocketed. And go back to that academic study, that story. First, the story didn't study, because there was 50 stories or 52 stories. Only one of them was 53 stories. Only one of them was the actual studies, and we're going to do that tonight. To address the gap, and I'm going to challenge you with academic studies. Associated Professor Rong Fu, and I got the list of the academics who listed their name at the Waseda University in Japan. Examining natural disaster generated anxiety, and that's a key word all night, far beyond its direct material impact. The Fukushima nuclear power plant accident that took place on March the 15th, 2011. It's actually March 11th, 2011. The researchers studied the effects of maternal anxiety. The effects of maternal anxiety. Well, like the same could be said about women in countries that are impoverished, right? They have maternal anxiety. Anxiety about radiation exposures on their fetus in particular. So any other anxiety doesn't have this attribute. They don't have research showing this is a normal thing, right? They're trying to conflate any illnesses or diseases or autoimmune deficiencies or injuries or illnesses with anxiety, not anthropogenic man-made radiation. It was published as usual in just before this year's anniversary, and it's going to appear in volume 107 of Journal of Health Economics on May the 1st, 2026. So it'll be back in your face again. We're going to jump into that study, other studies here right now. Their findings were published online March the 7th. We already done that one. So if we go backwards and we look at other events of radioactive fallout to help people appreciate how wrong their study really is and why it's wrong, and how easy it is to disprove them for any journalist on the planet. You don't have to be a forensic investigative journalist to stand tall before these lawyers. The influence of the post-Chernobyl fallout and birth defects abortion rates in Austria, that's a long ways away. Or trends in human sex odds at birth in Europe and the Chernobyl nuclear plant. So these studies showing that Chernobyl contaminated Europe and created, in all of Europe, a sex ratio difference of more males than females. So when you get more males than females, you have less reproduction, right? You have a decrease in the species. So it's not just humans. You got to realize the species are way more vulnerable. What motivated Fu to conduct a study? Well, clearly she's a scumbag and degenerate and a monster. And a hideous traitor of humanity and her friends and families and loved ones and everybody in our country on top of that. You'd have to be a monster to sign on to a study like this. You have to be like an actual monster, a sadistic demon to produce a study like this. And this study was produced so it could go viral, and it did. I got sick after 53 headlines. I put all of them in a folder, and then the next day I started in on it, and I was like, this is despicable, my goodness. Associate Professor Rong Fu, Associate Professor, well, I'll explain what Associate Professor is in a second, from the Faculty of Commerce, not nuclear science. What motivated Fu, living and working in Japan? She said, I witnessed firsthand how profoundly the accident shook the public. Not made them sick, but shook them. Anxiety. Particularly pregnant women and young mothers in the nuclear wasteland, of course. Chernobyl, prenatal loss of 400 male fetuses in the Czech Republic. Even in regions far from any physical danger. There is no region on the planet that is far from physical danger, anthropogenic man-made catastrophic releases. Hence Chernobyl. Down syndrome time clustering in January 1987 in Belarus linked to Fukushima. Down syndrome. Autism, Down syndrome are the first studies are going to produce after a nuclear accident in countries down, so-called downwind. You're only downwind for about 20 days, then the whole planet is a plume. Then the whole planet is downwind. Following from Chernobyl accidents, overall cancer incidences in Finland. Chernobyl followed with prenatal mortality in England and Wales 3,000 kilometers away. So if Chernobyl can kill the prenatal mortality, create prenatal mortality, Fukushima unique geography creates a rare scientific opportunity to answer whether fear alone could harm a developing fetus. What's interesting about that to me, because we've been at this since day one, since 2011, is we've heard that before, that particular narrative. Oh, well, the mountains will stop the radiation, and plutonium's really heavy, so it doesn't go very far. Like, I can show you that stuff. It'll make you sick if you know the difference. Maternal psychological anxiety could harm a developing fetus, right? That was Waseda University on the top corner. That's the university, right? Not only did they publish the story, they also promoted it on their news page. Fukushima unique geography created a rare scientific opportunity to answer whether fear alone, so they're suggesting that nothing got out of the country or out of the local area. This is TEPCO's plutonium radioactive fallout. This is only based upon a very few days. Harmful rumors. In America, up close. So this model didn't include. This was TEPCO's model. This was TEPCO's numbers put into a very popular model. Now, Neptunium-239 will decay to plutonium after 2.5 days, 50% of it, rather. And it does that for 10 times. So after 25 days, all of it is now plutonium-239. So right now, that 20 days and 21-day models, 20 and 21-day models are almost entirely plutonium-239. And as you know about plutonium, it killed all the dogs. Oh, okay, hang on. So the story is crazy because you had 4 reactors that had around 8 reactor cores at the top of each of the buildings. And you can find that documentation on my front page about that. So if you come to my front page and scroll down and go to the video section and look for this one down here. Fukushima Unit 4 has 4 reactor cores. Fuel pools melt down.
By the way, the fact that this has happened at unit number 4. By the way, the fact that this is
just bear with me. So this is Professor Von Hippe. This is March the 16th, day 5. He's on national TV, and they're asking him how many reactor cores are in the fuel pools at the top of the buildings. He says, now there's 5.5 reactor cores produced for each reactor every decade. So you could theoretically, because they're 30 or plus years old, it could be 15, right? But
By the way, the fact that this has happened at unit number 4 is consistent with the theory that it really did dry out. Fuel from the unit number 4 was most recently discharged. Okay. And therefore was the hottest. Water would have boiled off more rapidly.
In terms of what we know about the capacity, how many fuel rods would likely be inside that reactor, what sort of quantity are we talking about radioactivity?
I've heard two to about 8 reactor cores worth.
So if it can't be controlled.
Reactor 4, let me go backwards a little bit.
Reactor cores worth.
So if it can't be controlled.
It explodes. Well, clearly it's already gone. And so they lost that entire inventory. Now, there was 4 buildings that lost their entire inventories, and that means there's around 36 reactor cores. Chernobyl was a small reactor, it was a graphite reactor, it was a new reactor. These are massive reactors. These are pure uranium, pure plutonium. They had decades of reactor cores at the top of the buildings. So for the academic community, of course, didn't call out the study and say, wait, that's not true. Very high concentrations of hot particles. So that study, that model of radioactive fallout based on TEPCO's numbers doesn't include any of the fuel pools or the emissions in all. Right, it's just from venting, not from the actual nuclear meltdowns. Okay, as part of the study, back to that study, the team looked at 3 birth cohorts covering about 1.1 million births. They developed a novel measure of the radiation anxiety using Google Trend. So this is absurdness again. So Google Trends data to examine whether birth outcomes deteriorated systematically as anxiety intensified. Excuse me, that was fun. I'll try that again. To examine whether birth outcome deteriorates systematically as anxiety intensities increased across geographic areas. I showed you the actual plume covered the entire planet in 21 days. But it's all the isotopes, it's not just iodines or plutoniums, unfortunately. Google Trends data. But there's so much of this data that exists. They closed 130 schools in Korea, South Korea. Of course, South Korea denies that happened now. And this story is coming from the university, but they also produced a study too. So it's not just a study. Right here, story. The story is based off, they're really promoting that study, right? We'll come back into that study in a second. Or a minute, or whatever it takes to get through it. Because this is the kind of stuff these are educational programs, right? But the whole operation was also for do field studies, so boots on the ground academic studies, boots on the ground studies. There was no reason for them to do the study only to cover up the incredible amounts of congenital malformations and heart diseases and everything else. Researchers found babies born in Japan immediately after Fukushima, but it is forever after Fukushima. It's not immediately after Fukushima, it's forever. They only studied immediately after, allegedly. Were most likely to be born preterm or with low birth rates. So immediate is completely dishonest. This will never stop. Psychological stress during pregnancy is known to affect birth outcome, but isolating its effects have been difficult. Again, this is an oxymoron to say it that. This is a university saying stuff like this. It's not difficult because there's lots of precedents already. Chromosomes, aberrations in Norwegian reindeer. They know it about they study every species. Estimated lifetime effective doses to hunters and their families in 3 most contaminated counties in Sweden after Chernobyl. To help prevent intergenerational harm. Intergenerational harm is not caused by stress. It's caused by anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout. It affects the reproduction of all species, not just humans. So then they have this bizarre effects of post-Fukushima radiation anxiety on birth outcome. They produced that, and we'll come to that in a second. Anxiety. So then I looked at anxiety, the word anxiety, in just this story. I can't really see it. I can't really do justice on that one. Let me try it. Because usually if I go to, we can zoom in a lot better. Let me zoom in on that top up there. So just in that story, there was 14 times. Just in that story. But when you get to the studies, it was almost 90 times, I believe. Anxiety, anxiety, anxiety. There's a song about that, right? Anxiety. It's really catchy. It's on Click Clock. Effects of post-radiation anxiety. So when you start looking at that, of course, you'll find it in that too, right? You see where the arrows are too in the lines. Even in regions not at risk of exposures. Cause widespread fear. Well, like Chernobyl was a single reactor, was a small reactor, was a graphite reactor, was a new reactor. Anxiety, 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 anxiety. So even if you don't read it, your brain subconsciously, right, is subconsciously indoctrinated with the word anxiety. Anxiety. Intergenerational harm. So it's a pretty rude thing they done there. And it's a desperate thing, really, when you look at it. That's pretty desperate. Anxiety caused by the incident have negative effects on fetal development. You don't suppose it was the radioactive fallout? In the United States and Canada, cesium, this was the French government. This was a spike. This was discovered in North America and Canada. Well, it was a Canadian, I believe, study originally. France took the numbers and made a statement about it, made a study about it, of the spike. It was a spike. This wasn't an opinion. This wasn't a conjecture. This wasn't what might happen. This was a spike. It was 1 million to 10 million atoms of just cesium-137. This is only based upon 7 days, the 18th of March 2011, that particular one. This is the video of the French government's model. This is based upon 30 days. Oh, sure, I didn't put the video there. I just put screen captures every 10 days. So that's 10 days, that's 20 days, and that's 30 days. So even at 10 days, a lot of America and Canada is buried under heavy, 1 million to 10 million atoms per cubic meter of air of cesium-137. These are absurd numbers. These are absurd. And that plume will have everything else into it. It's going to be full. The biggest byproduct, of course, is the curium isotopes, as I walked you through the studies about that earlier. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportions at birth. This is one of the first studies they also do after a big nuclear accident in countries, is to look at, is there more males and females being born? Legally induced abortions in Denmark after Chernobyl. Legal abortions in Sweden after Chernobyl. Image titled, Effects of Post-Fukushima Material Radiation Anxiety on Birth Outcomes. And there, that's in relations to this one here. Ionizing radiation and human gender proportions at birth. Pregnancy outcome in Finland after Chernobyl. Pregnancy outcome in Norway after Chernobyl. Why were those studies being produced? And Chernobyl was it was a brutal one, but it was tiny compared to Fukushima. Chernobyl was brutal. even though it was tiny compared to Fukushima, that's irrelevant. It was a brutal nuclear accident. There was 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom were closed after Chernobyl. 9,400 farms. So the only way you can contaminate 9,400 farms 3,000 kilometers away is if you contaminate all of Europe first, and then all of the United Kingdom, Scotland, Ireland. They should have abandoned Scotland, Ireland, and Europe. Right? That's acknowledged because they closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and Europe. That meant all the water was contaminated, all the air, all the land, all the trees, all the flowers, all the plants, all the communities, all the playgrounds were contaminated. It didn't just, radiation doesn't go flying over countries, looking for farmland, okay? You know what I'm saying? Trends in birth and birth-sex ratio in the vicinity of just a research reactor. These are very small reactors. So why were they doing birth-sex ratios in the vicinities? Because they were going to see a discrepancy because everybody's poisoned just from the small reactors. You can't contain the emissions from the fuel pools. The fuel pools are splitting atoms directly into the environment forever. So when you put a reactor through a chain reaction, it's now a perpetual machine. And you might take it out of the reactor core, a huge part of it, after 12, 14 months. That's typical. Now it's no containment, and not really entire containment when it's in the reactor, by the way. It can be burped out to tourists. So you're going to contaminate your whole planet anyway, because the fuel pools are producing the same atoms for millions of homes and businesses. When they were in a reactor, they're still producing those same atoms when they're in the fuel pool. And that is released directly into your environment up tall, skinny stacks every day. It's a genocide machine. It's a disease factory. That's what a nuclear power plant fuel pool is. And there's 1,000 fuel pools worldwide, full of decades of reactor cores. So each one of them are releasing the same atoms they would for millions of homes and businesses directly into your environment every day. That's a genocide for every species. Radiation doesn't there's no discrepancy. No, it doesn't differentiate between humans and species. Babies born in Japan follow the Fukushima nuclear accident. There's no species on the planet with an autoimmune trigger that can defend against it. Babies born in Japan following the Fukushima nuclear accident in 2011 were preterm, had low birth rates than those born before the accident. We're going to do a deep dive on this soon. Maternal anxiety about radiation exposure. Now, this was the university's story, but they also have the study accounted for a significant proportion of the differences. Anxiety accounted for a significant, not all of them, but a significant is what they're saying. Right? So they're basically leaving themselves they're leaving themselves what they call a plausible deniability clause. Trends in birth and birth rate sex ratio in the vicinities of research reactors in Germany. Human sex ratio at birth and residential proximities to nuclear facilities in France. So they're doing studies of male to female to male sex ratio of newborns. Not just Germany, but all reactors they'll do that because they know they can't contain it. And they don't put a lot of people in those studies because that would make a lot of noise, right? So just a couple of people, but they want that documentation. Anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout has been studied more than anything else on the planet. Effects of radiation on the reproductive system. All of these studies disprove that study here. Maternal anxiety about radiation exposure accounts for a significant proportion of these differences. Does the study Fukushima radioactive fallout of fear tied to birth problems, not radiation, show that scientists are corrupt? Well, yeah, of course it does. And of course, the censorship on me is just extraordinary. It's extraordinary, really. Prenatal irradiation induces brain neuropathological and cognitive impairment. Prenatal irradiation induces brain and cognitive impairments. You can look up that one. Embryo and fetus is more radiosensitive than neonates and adult human beings. The main potential effects of prenatal radiation exposure in the human brain includes, not limited to, growth retardation. So just this one study there, which is any academic could have found that, or any journalist would have found that before they published the fake study from the university. The university was well aware of all of this. Everybody who participated in the study were well aware of all of this. Small head and brain size. So growth retardation for prenatal exposures is well known. This is old news, right? Medical experts, Japan's safety standards and radiation levels for children are unconscionable. It never stopped, did it? They have attacked the children nonstop. The academic community in Japan has never stopped attacking the sick children post-Fukushima, because children bore the brunt of it. Let's keep it rolling there. We're not even to the good stuff. And this is all great stuff, mind you. 10,000 atoms a kilogram of cesium detected minimum soil. So this is evidence that there was a huge release. All of this stuff is evidence there was a huge release. Plutonium detected in black substances. Over 500 microsieverts an hour of plutonium. These are absurd numbers, but yet officially nobody got hurt ever, under any circumstances, anywhere on the entire planet, from man-made radiation. I've heard him say that. And some of the most respectable people you very well would know have come out with those assertions, which are patently absurd. 1 million atoms a kilogram of cesium detected at Fukushima school after being decontaminated. So this is not decontamination. And the people who allegedly done the decontamination are the homeless and the destitute. You can't decontaminate a school. And you can never decontaminate a school with these particular attributes. It's just... And everybody's sleeping on this subject worldwide because it's been hid away from them. Study finds 12,000 microsieverts average thyroid doses internal radiation in the children. The government has assured the levels of such doses were 0. Again, these are absurd numbers. 12 millisieverts is an absurd number. So the thyroid is producing, by the way, hormones for their entire growth and the rest of their lives, but particularly their growth for 20, 25 years. And when you're talking about these numbers, this is a gamma they're talking about there, and you can't equate that with millisieverts, unless you're saying they got fuel in them, which is basically what they're saying. Or you would multiply 12,000 by 750 to get the physical atoms that are in the body to create a reading. External reading would have to be a lot more than that to create an external reading. Like using the millisieverts in any human is absurdly evil. It's completely disproportionate, missing what's really happening. It's physical atoms. And each atom is pulsing energy at the speed of light every second in your body, destroying your cells, your chromosomes, your DNA, and permanent lesions to your organs. The health effects are just unbelievable. Severe internal exposure, 252,000 atoms of radioactive cesium in just one person. But just to look at cesium only is absurdness. Drinking water is unsafe for infants. If it's unsafe for infants, it's unsafe for everybody. And not only that, it means the pipes are now radiated permanently, because you have fuel particulates. With the increased use of low-dose radiation for diagnosis, well, low-dose radiation is still radiation, anthropogenic man-made radiation. So still, it never goes away. Or radiotherapeutic purposes. Like I can walk you through studies on radiation therapy. You will never even drive past a hospital for months because it's a genocide. Radiation therapy is genocide. So say you got a tumor in your shoulder blade, which is probably one of the strangest places to get one. But say you got one there. And so they're going to radiate that to get rid of the radiation. Does that make any sense to you? Now you're going to end up with 7 or 8 or 9 tumors throughout your bodies, including rectal tumors, rectal cancer. Prenatal radiation risk to the brain. So there's a lot known. There's not just a lot, there's an absurd, an insane, an unbelievable, inconceivable amount of documentation of the harm of radiation. It's absurd. They've studied everything too. And I'll show you some of that coming up actually. Prenatal radiation risk to the brain. So let me go back before that one, to this one, to that one. Let me go back before that one. I'm just going to grab a few, and I like to do, and I always grab random because I have so much. Just going to grab random radiation studies. Here we go. Well, let's do Fukushima. I got a huge freaking folder of Fukushima studies. I'm just going to make a point to you, though, that Fukushima didn't do anything, didn't cause any harm. Then explain what I'm going to show you here in a second. Now, I can show you so many studies, and over the next few days, if I can keep the momentum going. See, the one thing with me is I'm only happy when I'm doing this. Happiest when I'm doing this. Okay, so I'm just going to run you through some. I want you to think about what I'm going to show you as they studied. So they studied, everything I'm showing you is studies they done on radioactive fallout just from Fukushima. Just to try to orient you on. So everything you're seeing, they assume was radioactive from Fukushima. Everything you're looking at, all of these studies are what they're assuming. Now they need to downplay everything. So all of these studies are meant to downplay the radioactive fallout. But once you start looking at how much of this they produced, they've done a study on every facet of the ecosystem so they can downplay it. They are very, very thorough. They are very, very versed in covering up. And they cover it up by doing a study on everything in the ecosystem. So no matter which argument is brought, they can produce a study saying, look, we looked at it and there was no harm. They won't show you any of this, the rest of it. They'll just show you that one study, or this study, or that study. To downplay, they studied every facet of the ecosystem, everything, without exception. They study stuff that you, and they studies the scaremongering about Fukushima as radiation is damaging. Scaremongering. And new scientists are well respected. But evil, when you look at all the academic studies they produce to downplay it, it's terrifying. And there's so many of them out there doing that. All of these studies are meant to say we studied it and there was no harm. Have a nice day. We studied it, there was no harm. We studied that, there was no harm. We studied this, there was no harm in Greece. We studied that, there was no harm. We studied this, there was no harm. We studied that, we studied everything. Why would you study everything? Well, because, radiation. It contaminates everything. Do you get it yet? They studied everything so they can downplay it. And when I say they studied everything, you have no idea. If you're not here regularly, you'll have no idea how absurdly true that statement actually is. You can't keep up with it. There's 4.5 million studies alone in North America each year. Half of them are on the nuclear industry to cover it up. They studied everything in the ecosystem. There's nothing they don't know about it. There's zero that they don't know about the adverse side effects. There's an adverse side effect to everything with replicating cells. So they have to study everything with replicating cells on the entire planet so they can have a study to downplay it. Right? That's the insanity, and it works. Right? They got away with it now for 80 years. The tide has turned against them. A lot of the investors and policymakers will find my material, particularly material like this, and they're just going to switch off the nuclear industry. Well, no, we can't do that this week. I can't sit there and do a meeting. I got to think about things. That's their typical responses. And over the last decades, I've talked to a lot of these people, and they don't understand that they're fed lies. They're fed one of these studies or two of these studies. If they say, well, what about here? And then they'll produce a study, they'll show a study, or they'll produce it, if they got to downplay it. Even though they have already gotten way ahead on that. They study everything because they want to know themselves. They want to make sure they're killing the entire ecosystem. That's the only reason you would do what they're doing. Did we forget anything? No, that was contaminated, that was contaminated, that was contaminated, that got contaminated, that was contaminated, that's contaminated, these are contaminated, they were contaminated, that country, this country, those countries, everything's contaminated by anthropogenic man-made. And there's nothing on the planet that has an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. That doesn't, the whole industry is rotten in ways that most people would never accept. I accept it because I've done the research expeditions for 6 years in particular, from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska, 4 to 5 months a year on the ocean doing species counts. I'm an ex-commercial diver, and so I can't deny it. I'm haunted by it all the time, 24 hours a day. That has changed my life forever. All I can do is fight back. I can't even exist. I only exist if I'm fighting back. If I'm speaking out, if I'm providing documentation. I have to provide documentation for my assertions. How many do you need? Because I'll get it for you. Whatever it takes to convince you that I'm sincere and honest. I'm doing this because the world has nobody to do it. If I don't do it, nobody's going to do it. And I don't blame them. They studied everything so they could downplay it. And you get a load of what I'm showing you right now, right? This is just not even a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of the studies we got. They've studied everything in the ecosystem. This is what they do. And then they come out and say, look, we studied it, it's okay. It's not so bad. They've studied, and this is just Fukushima studies. The colonist industry, very well funded, is an understatement of a lifetime. Colonist industry, obsessively funded, is leaning towards the right track. They have endless amount of resources. It's endless. They have every university at their disposal to trick you, deceive you, manipulate you. And that's been engineered for 80 years to do that exact thing. We just have a few people trying to educate the planet, just a handful. That is a terrifying statement. That is the most terrifying statement. Radioactive urine in children pose a small health risk. They got a study for everything. There's a study for every study, and then a study for the study. They had spies spying on the spies that were spying on the scientists. For the last 80 years, they've been doing that. That's how anal this industry and entity. This is an entity. This is a death cult. The only way you can describe, once you look at this nuclear industry, like we do, then you're left with this indelible fact that this is a death cult. There's nothing else fills in that equation. Okay, back to prenatal radiation risk to the brain's PubMed, which is funded by the American government, by the way. X-ray radiation damage to the nervous system during development has been well documented. So damage to the nervous system is well documented. Damage to everything is well documented, and everything is well documented so they can downplay it. You'll get the downplayed version. Universities won't get access to this so that they can create the same studies, so that way the industry can quantify the results of another study that they already had done the exact same thing. And who paid for all of that? Every year, 4.3 million studies. The amount of money we're talking about is just absurd. It's absurd. And that's stolen from the taxpayers in North America and everything, everywhere. We're not talking North America. There's growing concerns about the health effects of radiological examinations or therapies in pregnant women. There's growing concern. Pregnant women are the most vulnerable of vulnerables. So to suggest there was no adverse side effects and it was only from worry is very worrisome to me. With limited human data available, That's absurd. With limited human data available. Associated Professor Rong Fu of Waseda University says there's no data available. How many times have we heard that narrative over the years? Associated Professor is an academic title used in higher education to denote a faculty member who has advanced beyond the entry-level assistant professor position but not yet reached the rank of full professor. They're still a tenured professor, right? They're still getting a big paycheck, a continuous paycheck. Research and International Atomic Energy Agency, IRPA's UNSCLEAR, the IPRC, all UN organizations, have infiltrated all your universities, and they are getting paid. That's their kickback, see? They're associated professor of this university, associated professor of that university. They're all tenured. So they all get a paycheck from each of these institutions and paid for by the taxpayers of each of those countries. And so when they got all this money rolling in, and all I got to do is write a couple of fake stories a year, why not? That's what their moms, dads done their whole life, and their great-grandparents and their grandparents. They go to university to get a degree, to get the job, to lie to you because they can make the most money doing that. Fetal development in a critical state with effects that can last throughout life. So yet they know. They clearly know. Yet identifying the effects of the maternal psychological stress on the fetuses has been difficult. No, it was never difficult. Like to say that there was no adverse side effects from Fukushima in Japan is an egregious betrayal. That's the type of people who should get the death penalty. That's what the death penalty is for. Japan has the death penalty. Radioactive dust, interesting way to put it. Radioactive fallout in Tokyo after recent fog at 4,000 atoms a kilogram of cesium. It never disappears. Now, if you're only going to acknowledge cesium, you should lose your degree immediately. Journalists find Tokyo indoor dust in their houses, in their homes, in their apartments, in their stores, in their schools, in their businesses at 1,730 atoms a kilogram. These are absurd numbers. So we've seen lots of these stories about nuclear sites pre-Fukushima where 80 atoms in a square meter, let alone a kilogram, and there's 66.6 of those make a square meter. So even 80 atoms per square meter would be considered an evacuation zone. So all of these homes, pre-Fukushima, would have been torn down with a tent over it to stop the radioactive fallout from contaminating everything else. But because you're assuming this was an accident at some hospital or something, say? But every house is probably way worse than this. Dust with Fukushima fallout is a source of human radiation exposure. No, Fukushima is 200,000 atoms a kilogram of radioactive cesium in dust from outside the Fukushima prefecture. Tokyo's third highest cesium levels of all testing locations throughout Japan. A large amount of radioactive fallout. So rather than say radioactive fallout, to put radioactive dust. Instead of putting a difficult to return zone, it should be a nuclear wasteland. Right, grammar is a terrifying weapon. Radioactive black fallout striking Tokyo. This is the plutonium and curium. This is alphas and betas. And neutrons. I've been told it's everywhere in the city. So they should abandon it. Hospital forced to limit number services and reduce the number of patients due to TEPCO. We don't know how long we'll be able to continue operating under the current circumstances. 5 hospitals refuse to provide medical care to children. We can't be seen by a doctor when we want to be seen. Doctor, it will be confusing if the result is different than the Fukushima Medical University. Fukushima Medical University was taken over by UNSCLAR and IRPA and the IPRC and International Atomic Energy Agency / United Nations. We've covered stories about this. They dictate what's a health issue or not in the entire country from that one institution. Hospitals refuse to treat Fukushima plant workers. Some of them are owned by TEPCO, by the way. 80% of residents tested after radioactive iodine up to 87 millisieverts, 87,000 microsieverts. So the radioactive hormones, if you're producing that much, by the way, in the thyroid, which is gamma they're talking about, then you're producing radioactive stem cells in their skeleton permanently. These are absurd things we're talking about here. Radioactive iodine in 50% of the children's thyroid at 35,000 millisieverts, microsieverts, 35,000 microsieverts. This is terrifying stuff. This is the facts. To address the gap, Associate Professor refused to acknowledge anything from the Faculty of Commerce. So why are they doing radiation studies when they're not radiation experts? And why is this particular study, fake study, getting so much traction and constant, consistent, and longevity of traction will show up over time. Invisible threat, tangible harm, radiation anxiety, and the birth outcome of after Fukushima. This is the study. Rong Fu and those three other ones. It's surreal every time I see this. This betrayal, this absurd betrayal. Does study, Fukushima followed a fear tied to birth problems, not radiation. Proved that scientists are corrupt. Unfortunately, it not only proves it, and then look how corrupt YouTube is. Right, they allowed the nuclear industry to censor me to where I get 12 viewers. And arguably, easily to argue, the most important story in human history. Identifying just 8% of the children in 2001 Japanese control group had thyroid tumors. And now it's 36%. So 35.8%, it used to be 1 in a million. So now it's 358,000 out of a million. Not now, but in 2012, it's much worse now. 13,646 out of 38,200. These are absurd when it used to be 1 in a million. This is absurd numbers we're talking about. 36% of Fukushima children have abnormal thyroid growths. You can look up that story. So the thyroid, what it means, the tumors were up to 2 centimeters minimum. And what that meant, when you read the whole thing, the thyroid tumor of a child is around 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters. And an adult is 3 by 5 centimeters. So you're talking about a thyroid tumor that the entire size or bigger than a child's thyroid. That's a tumor. So that's a cancerous tumor, but it's a radioactive tumor. It's full of isotopes. And so the child, as they're developing for the rest of their life, are producing radioactive hormones. And if you're talking about that much radiation to produce that effect, then they're definitely producing radioactive stem cells for their entire life, and particularly their 20-25 year growth cycle, right, development cycle. You have to protect the females of all species from man-made radiation. That's the one takeaway that the whole world should take to heart, because without the females, there's the reproduction of all species will disappear. And radiation are 4 times more tumors for females than males from anthropogenic man-made radiation. Anthropogenic man-made radiation then, right, can be equated with targeting females. This is a technology that they knew had that attribute in the 50s and successfully covered it up. And now to the point where I get 11 people watching my show that I've been doing for decades. 10 people, I stand corrected. Does the study Fukushima follow the fear tied to birth problems, not radiation? Now that study is everywhere right now. But nobody's interested in it. Nobody's interested in the facts. No, that's censorship. That's absurd censorship. It's blatant. It's desperate, is what they're doing. Right? That's desperation to censor me that much. 35.8% of children in the study have lumps or tumors. Now, lumps are tumors, cysts are tumors. But this is not the same as cancer, said Associated Professor, Fukushima University Medical School. Of course it's the same as cancer. It always will be the same as cancer, just because the belly of the beast, Fukushima University Medical School, to cover up itself says is absurd. The tumor is the same size. It's not a growth like a skin growth or something. Like it's a tumor growth on the thyroid, for goodness sakes. So when you go look at this, let me find the other version of that for you. Like, it's so shocking that they're able to get away with this. And they work hard. They're monitoring me, they're monitoring you as we speak. They're absolutely obsessed with, like, they have lost their minds that somebody is talking about the truth. It's really special how evil they actually are, and they're okay with that. They know they have to stop myself, because if their loved ones or their children finds out the truth, then they will never have anybody they can turn to. They'll be hated by their own family. They're morons. Some moron, an industry of bird brains, educated but stupid, chicken necks, right? Hang on here. Let me see if I can get a look here. Here you go. Here's what the short of the long study is. Nearly 1 in every 3 kids tested. The government decided they're benign, but that's simply because they refuse to acknowledge there's any adverse side effects. So 30% in Fukushima now with tumors of 2 centimeters or less, but that's the size of their thyroid gland. And then claiming cancer only increases after 10 sieverts. Well, 3 sieverts will melt your organ. You won't live long enough to get cancer because you died within 10 minutes. 36% of Fukushima children have abnormal thyroid growths. Invisible threat, tangled harm, radiation anxiety, back to that study, and birth outcome after Fukushima. Rong Fu, serial killer, and friends, of course. While physical radiation exposure was geographically limited and well documented, fear of radiation spread nationwide. Was physical radiation exposure was geographically limited. This is absurd to suggest there was any limit. It's absurd. The evidence I showed you all night quantifies that. Fear of radiation spread nationwide. Well, yeah, of course. And we exploit this. That was an interesting way, because they love conflating the lies with the truth, right? To examine how maternal anxiety independently affects fetal development. They still can't prove it. One thing we can prove, the Mangano study. An unexpected mortality increase in the United States following the arrival. This was Janet Sherman too, right? At that time, the first study came out was 14,000 extra people died in the first couple of weeks after Fukushima arrived, compared to any other year in that month. Joseph Magano and Janet, she died last year or the year before, Sherman. The multiple nuclear meltdowns, they actually happened. There was nuclear meltdown, but there's no fallout data. released large amounts of radioactive airborne that has spread through Japan to other nations. Thus, studies of contamination health hazards are mirrored. In the United States, Fukushima followed arrived just after 6 days in the United States and Canada. Some samples of radioactivity in precipitation, air, water, milk taken by the U.S. government showed levels hundreds of times above normal. However, small numbers of samples prohibited any credible analysis of temporal trends and spatial comparisons, which warranted more studies, right? U.S. health officials, now we're long after the fact we got the documentation. U.S. health officials reported weekly deaths by age in 122 cities, about 25 to 30% of the national total. Deaths rose 4.46% from 2010 to 2011 in the 14 weeks after the arrival of Fukushima failure, compared with 2.434% increase in the prior 14 weeks. This number of infant deaths after Fukushima rose 1.8%, compared with previous 8.37% decrease. Projecting the figures for the entire United States yields 14,000 deaths and 822 infant deaths in excess of the expected deaths. These preliminary data needed to be followed up, especially in light of similar preliminary U.S. mortality findings for the 4 months after Chernobyl fallout arrived in 1986. We recently reported an unusual rise in infant deaths in the northwestern United States in the 10 weeks period following the arrival of airborne radioactive plume from the meltdowns at Fukushima. More disaster changes and new radiation studies. Starting April, this is 2012, because that's December 2011, right? So starting that following April, which is 2012, general food will be lowered to 100 atoms a kilogram safety instead of the current 500. For milk, baby food will be 50 atoms a kilogram. 50 atoms a kilogram in adults, permanent lesions to their organs. In children, it's holes in their hearts. Amongst many other things, will be 50 atoms a kilogram drinking water at 10. How much water do you drink in a year? These are absurd numbers we're talking about. So imagine, at 10 atoms a kilogram, how are you going to limit that? How is the water reclamation facilities going to limit that? They can't. It's impossible. It's absurd to suggest you could. You have to close the whole country down if you're going to limit it to 10 becquerels a kilogram. Also changed in next April 2012, the general food will be lowered from 100 kilograms, and we've done that one, to 50. From 500, right? Current measures on radioactivity contamination in Japan, a policy situation analyst. Japan is a pilot country in the World Health Organization foodborne disease burden. It says this study aims to assess the Japanese government's policies to reduce radio contamination risk. You can't. And to identify strategies to strengthen food policies. You can't when it comes to radiation. It can't be done. We extracted information on food shipments and sale restrictions, allowable radiation contamination limits, monitoring activities, and monitoring results. The standards for allowable radiation cesium, when from 500 atoms a kilogram, they're only looking at cesium. They refuse to acknowledge there's any other isotopes. So these people should all be in jail. Every one of them. They don't have a right to exist on your planet. They don't have a right to breathe the same air as you. They didn't find any. Everything was contaminated worldwide. Oh, and this was interesting. The editor was Tim Mercer. Right? He was very popular. He was supposed to be the good guy. He's the farthest thing from the good guy. So that was the old one over there in the white, and that's the new limits here that was going to come in 3 months later, right? Or 4 months later in April. So in 2011, the limit was drinking water, milk, and dairy products was 200 becquerels, which is atoms, each atom. Think of you need an atom, an isotope, to produce the becquerel. The becquerel is the pulse of energy. So 200 atoms, 500 atoms. So this is why they had 865,000 extra cancers in the first year. This is just, it's a whole different type of evil. Like there's evil and then there's the nuclear industry. And then look for infant foods. The EU had infant foods at 400 atoms a kilogram for infant foods. Because the EU and the United States raised their limit when Fukushima happened to absurd numbers. And then Japan went in half. Japan was like, oh, well, ours is 500, theirs is 1,200 or 1,000. So we're okay. We're the good guys. There's no such thing as a good guy in the nuclear industry, or girl in particular. Using universal Japanese birth records linked to census data combined with a novel Google Trends-based measure of radiation-specified anxiety. That's the strangest thing imaginable. A novel is a fictitious, by the way. Novel, a fictitious Google Trend-based measure of radiation anxiety. You got to be pretty freaking evil to do that, eh? Imagine how evil she is, and the people in the university. Can you imagine how evil they got to be to do that one? How twisted and sick and demented and disconnected you got to be to do that. I got a bad stream going on here. Not streaming. Oh, streaming. That's scary. Rain with 20 million. Rain with 20 million particles of iodine-131, 10 times more 132, 30 times more 133, 31 times more iodine-129. Daughter had so many tumors you couldn't count them on her thyroid. People from Tokyo area reported thyroid tumors. Doctors laughing at the patients. To say the industry is heartless is insane too. Right, you're still downplaying how evil they actually are. Now almost 100,000 kids with thyroid problems. Whether that's alarming is difficult to say. No, it used to be 1 in a million. If that's not alarming, then what is? Oh. I'm used to being back at my desk. I've been trying to claw myself back. It's tough. But I've done it so many times. Oh, that's not the one I wanted. Hang on. That doesn't hurt, but the next one next to it. I'm just going to show you that, because I said it enough times. Here we go. So let me go back to this one. This one. This one. So it used to be
今そこに元気な人が死んでくんだよね。
used to be 1 in a million. Just give me 1 second. I just dropped that.
まさに今そこに元気な人が死んでくんだよね。
But there's clear evidence rates have risen.
Damn it.
まさに今そこに元気な人が死んでくんだよね。
But there's clear evidence rates have risen. Before the disaster in 2011, the rate of thyroid cancer was between 1 and 2 cases in every million children.
1 to 2 cases per million children. Now it's 100,000 out of 100,000. Whether that's alarming, high, is difficult to say. No, it's not difficult to say. It used to be 1 in a million. What's so difficult about telling the truth? You're telling the truth. That's what's so difficult about it. 80% of the residents tested have radioactive iodine in the thyroids at 87,000 microsieverts, 87 millisieverts. Some residents face potential health risk, said the professor. No, every one of them do. And these are catastrophic. These are never seen before numbers. These are never conceived before numbers. You can't get rid of the sewage. 10 of the 12 sewage plants are radioactive. Children were playing in nuclear wastelands, including Alphas. Of course, how can you not be playing in Alpha? Just after a rainfall in Tokyo, metropolitan Tokyo is 36 million people. After a single rainfall here, rain caused 29,250,000 atoms per square meter in the soil. Like, these are absurd. These are where you run away screaming. You never look back, you never go back. You know, if your Geiger counter says 29,250,000, it's all of a sudden it'll start screaming, run. Just get out of here. Combined with a novel Google Trends-based measure of radiation-specific anxiety. Like, how does Google Trend show anxiety from radiation? With radiation-specific anxiety accounting for 72 to 79% of the overall preterm birth effects and 28 to 37% of the overall birth weight effects. The effects are concentrated amongst socially economically disadvantaged mothers during the first trimester exposure, with the most severe impact on vulnerable infants at the very low, extremely low birth rate category. So saying that socioeconomically disadvantaged, they were the people that were still eating the food grown in the nuclear wasteland. They got the worst doses. But to suggest that this was the only time there was any adverse side effects is absurd. It went from 1 in a million children with thyroid tumors to all of them. Our findings indicated that the invisible threats generated measurable intergenerational health impacts. So this is a cover story for each generation having congenital malformations, congenital heart diseases, and all kinds of other health issues. And so this is the official story they're going to roll out every time there's a census that shows there's an increase of children being adversely with health issues. They're going to try to roll this out so they don't blame the nuclear industry. That's not evil. That's beyond evil. That's categorically criminal. Anxiety. So let me go backwards. I might be able to see it on this page. It brings up here. So at some point. Yeah, so 93. I'm putting, see at the very top of the page up there, anxiety. So 93. 93 connotations of anxiety. And so we're just going to run through that, maybe. I can get it right here. Anxiety. So what I done was I just highlighted the word anxiety throughout the study. And you can see they use anxiety. So every time, if you're just scanning through it, this is what you're taking away is the word anxiety subconsciously that was being imprinted into you. The major mainstream media published a report on thyroid cancers, 30% in Fukushima, with tumors of 2% or 2 centimeters or less, and claiming that the thyroid gland was 5 centimeters by 3 centimeters. But that's for adults, not for children. Children are 2 centimeters. Then, of course, they put in the claim that 10 sieverts or 10,000 microsieverts was okay. That there is no studies that quantifies that assertions, or could. There's no way anybody would publish that particular assertion, because that would be fraudulent and criminal. Anxiety. Now, nearly 1 in every 3 kids tested, government decided they're benign, but they're not benign. They weren't benign before, they won't be benign when they go to the hospitals. They're not benign. In fact, in possible high numbers, the degenerate World Health Organization estimated Tokyo and Osaka, 600 miles away, infant thyroid doses at 10 to 100 millisieverts. And Nami, which is 7 kilometers south or north, is up to a full sievert. These are absurd numbers. These are absurd. These are just brutal, heartbreaking numbers. So the word anxiety was a weapon. That's a weapon. It's instead of calling you radiation phobia, a slur, which is a slur, they're using the word anxiety as the same capacity, right? They conflated that. New scientists, Japan's radioactive children will be fine. Thyroid glands are only emitting 35 millisieverts, 35,000 microsieverts. And it's suggesting anything under 100 millisieverts is not dangerous. Right? These people should be in jail. It should be illegal. It's not illegal to poison you, by the way, with radiation. Congress and parliaments in Japan's diet don't have the authority to make it illegal either. Only the nuclear regulatory agencies in respective countries have that authority. And they're not going to do it. Study claimed Tokyo newborns had safe 1,140 microsievert thyroid doses. They only counted food and water. They didn't include inhaled radioactivity. Didn't include the first 10 days when the iodine and other short-lived isotopes peaked. Again, like when you're only talking about iodines, that's the cover story because it has a short half-life, right? It's despicable. You really got to be just a worthless human to make that particular assertion, right? It's a criminal. At some point, it will be a crime, and retroactively, these people will be held accountable for it. That's the only way forward. You have to. Anxiety. Fukushima Part 2, Tokyo to begin burning massive amount of radioactive waste. So the parents had 1,000 different ways to get poisoned, and did. They couldn't eat anything without consuming radiation. They couldn't drink anything without consuming radiation. They couldn't breathe any air without breathing radiation and bioaccumulating it, I should say. Anxiety. Heaven help any academic, a nuclear academic that ever walks up to me and tells me I got radiophobia or anxiety. They're gonna have a miserable day, I can tell you that much. 600 kilometers from Fukushima, high levels of cesium detected in Osaka-based soil. So the whole country clearly was incredibly radioactive. The entire country is permanently, I should say, radioactive. The entire country, all the fresh water, all the land, every farm, every school, every university, every city, every hotel, every train station, every airplane, everything is contaminated. And then the nuclear industry is so powerful, so influential, they captured all your universities, all your media, key positions in your governments, very long time ago. Can't get rid of the garbage. Can't get rid of the sewage. You can't get rid of the sediment from water filtration, reclamation facilities. You can't get rid of the ashes from the incinerators. That's as nuclear wasteland as it's ever going to be. It doesn't get any worse. Well, Japan is, by many orders of magnitude, the worst in history combined. If you take all the known nuclear meltdowns in history, they don't add up to a Fukushima. And not taking this serious is a fatal mistake that a lot of people are making. And I provide how much information in a show, in a presentation? How much? Like how much? It's absurd. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of information that is uncontestable, unassailable. Children didn't even know about Fukushima. They were playing out in the nuclear wasteland. Anxiety. You got to be pretty evil, man, and folks and women, and you got to be pretty evil to do this study. That's the epitome of evil. 30 kilometers from the sewage was 334,000 atoms a kilogram. Sewage. The excrement. It's maddening, eh? Seeing the mountains of radioactive waste in Yokohama, a Mishani reporter, I felt the ominous weight of the nuclear crisis, which had seemed a distant affair to me till then. Radiation anxiety, and back to that study. Like I said, it's going to take several days. Faculty of Commerce, Rong Fu, with that's her information. And the other people in this study were Yunkyu Sohn department. This is South Korea. This was another university from Japan, School of Health Innovation. None of these are radiation experts. Political science. Why would you have a political science doing a radiation study with such a significant long-term impact on the population? Why would they be involved in it? It's social engineering, but it's evil. What they've done is it's inexcusable. I don't know why there's not 1 million people in Japan calling for them to be put in jail for the rest of their lives. These are horrific monsters to do that. Fear alone can cause harm on an unborn baby. Fukushima data revealed. Fear alone. But there's no precedence for that narrative. Why would you even conceive that in a nuclear wasteland? Why, oh why would you conceive that in a nuclear wasteland, right? Okay. Well, I guess we'll give it up here. Yeah, DCA saved me, for sure. They were going to take my kidney out for cancer, right? And we hit it with a half a gram twice a day, so a gram a day of DCA. What was it, 3 months or something? I took it half a gram every day, twice a day. And then I changed my diet, of course, and everything else. But the DCA, the original studies out of Canada on DCA way back in the day showed a 70% decrease in large tumors within 2 weeks. Which meant if you had a large tumor that was pressing up against your organ, you have to perform emergency invasive surgery. For my case, they wanted to take my kidney out, right? And my brain kept telling me, don't do that. I remember the doctor was bragging about how many of these he does every day, and there's nothing to it, and you'll be okay in a couple of months, and healthcare is going to come into your apartment or your house and take care of your people and for a few weeks, and slowly you get back on your feet and you have a long, healthy life after that. Lots of people leave a normal life after that surgery. And I had to get it right away. And yet here I am today. Many years later, right? A year after that, 2 years after that, I had a major heart attack. I spent 21 days in intensive care. And then we had surgeons and nurses come down on a jet plane that superseded the provincial government, took over the surgery to do the surgery, and gave me 7 stints. Put me back in action. I was a dead man that day. If I didn't get surgery that day, I died that day. It was pretty amazing. I'd done a show the next night. I went from dying to coming home from the hospital the next day from 21 days intensive care, and done a show that night just to prove that I'm back. I took a couple of days off and we came back swinging. Fear alone can harm. You know what else can harm a baby? Radioactive fallout. I'm just ending on that one because we touched on that earlier. This was a study 2019. 14.2% of 100,000 children needed open heart surgery in Japan. And that's the entire country, not just Fukushima Prefecture. That's the entire country of congenital heart diseases. That tells the story, right? We'll pick up hopefully tomorrow night. Hopefully there's no wars breaking out. Let me clean off the slate here because we went through a lot there tonight, my goodness. Yeah, well, I'm glad we got a show in. That definitely picked my spirits up too. My God, I'm still scrolling up so I can delete everything we already covered. We brought it tonight. Like it never stops. How much did we cover? That's ridiculous. It keeps going. Hang on, there it is. Wow. That is ridiculous. That was a good show. And we're going to end with the same song. I'm going to check the volume this time for you. Last time I jumped up to get a cup of tea and I was at the same time I was making chlorine dioxide water. Almost there. I think it was 270 or something. Yeah, my spot. Don't forget all the whales worldwide. We had 7 more emaciated whales. These are stories I've already covered. If you go to my live streams, you can watch the emaciation, starvation of all the whales worldwide. There's 7 or 8 of these videos. These are the thumbnails. We had 7 more emaciated gray whales in the last few days. We're going to play a closing song. We're going to play the same song we started off with tonight. Because that song was so necessary for the 6,000 the stories, there's a link underneath the story. 6,000, well, there's up to 10,000. I didn't bring the story up tonight, but I'm probably going to cover it later the week. Well, I will cover that story for sure, but there was 10,000 arrested, 6,000 were charged with sedition for protesting. That meant they couldn't get a bank account, they couldn't go to school, couldn't get a job, they couldn't leave the country, couldn't get a passport, they couldn't go to universities, and the government would bring them to court and then postpone it again, and they've done that for years and years and years as punishment. They charged them with sedition for protesting a nuclear power plant, and they had the moral upper ground. James wrote an incredible song and then put it to video of Did I Sell Secrets to Pakistan? We'll end with that tonight. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Thank you for finding the time, the courage to come here. We'll see everybody on the next one.
stood by the shore and I said what I thought about Kudankulam near our homes. I spoke of fish and children at night. They said I was speaking against the state. I was not asking for anything grand. I only asked what came from that plant. They called it sedition for saying those things. Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? Or did I say too much? If nuclear is so clean and safe, why call my worry sedition? Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? Or did I step out of place? If nuclear is so clean and safe, why answer me with handcuffs? They spoke of progress, they spoke of pride. They spoke as if nuclear was care. I spoke of water, boats and nets. They answered like I should not be there. Now I am wiser, now I am calmer. Now I repeat what they told me is true. If someone gets sick, it must be something else. Nuclear saves lives, or so they say. Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? Or did I say too much? If nuclear is so clean and safe, why call my worry sedition? Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? Or did I step out of place? If nuclear is so clean and safe, why charge me and put me in handcuffs? Now I get it, now I understand. Nuclear is clean. Now I get it, now I understand. It was only me. Now I get it, now I understand. I was making trouble then. Nuclear is kind and clean. That's what I say now here. Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? I only spoke of our shores. If nuclear is so clean and safe, why am I quieter now? Did I sell secrets to Pakistan? I only asked what it means. Now when they speak of a future built on nuclear, I say that nuclear is clean.